My name is Ethan Miller, and this happened when I was 29 years old. During the winter, I moved to Black Pine, a small logging town in northern Ontario that barely appears on maps. I came there chasing quiet, distance from the noise of my old life, distance from people, distance from myself. Black Pine promised all of that. The town sat buried beneath snow almost year-round, wrapped in towering pine trees that blocked cell signals and sunlight alike. The locals were polite but distant, their smiles stiff, their conversations short. No one asked why I'd come. No one asked how long I planned to stay. It felt like they already knew the answers. I rented a modest house at the edge of town, backed by dense forest. The landlord, a man named Walter, hesitated before handing me the keys. He warned me, strangely, never to follow footprints I didn't recognize after dark. I laughed it off at the time. I wish I hadn't. The first week passed quietly, too quietly. Snow fell constantly, swallowing sound, making the world feel padded and wrong. At night, Black Pine went silent. No dogs barking, no engines, not even wind. Just stillness. That changed on the 8th night. I woke up around 2:13 a.m. to the sound of crunching snow outside my bedroom window. Slow, deliberate, like footsteps that wanted to be heard. I lay frozen, listening as they circled the house, stopping occasionally, as if whoever or whatever was deciding where to go next. I told myself it was an animal, a deer, a fox, anything reasonable. Then I heard it stop directly outside my bedroom wall. Something pressed against the siding, not hard, just enough to let me know it was there. Breathing followed, long, wet exhales, fogging the glass. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. When the footsteps finally retreated toward the forest, I noticed something that made my blood turn cold. In the morning, the snow around my house was smooth and untouched. No footprints at all. The absence of footprints haunted me all day. I checked again and again, circling the house, kneeling to inspect the snow like maybe I'd missed something obvious. Nothing. The snowfall had been light that night, fresh enough that even a rabbit's trail would have shown. But there was nothing, as if whatever stood outside my window had never touched the ground. When I went into town later that afternoon, I mentioned it casually at the general store. The conversation stopped. 3 people went silent at once. The cashier, a woman named Linda, avoided my eyes and rang up my items too quickly. An older man behind me muttered, "You shouldn't talk about that." That night, Walter came by unannounced. He didn't step inside, just stood on my porch, snow gathering on his shoulders. He asked if I'd heard anything strange. I lied and said no. He nodded, relief flashing across his face. "Good," he said, "because once it knows you noticed, it doesn't stop." Sleep became impossible after that. Every night, I lay awake listening, counting the seconds between sounds. The footsteps returned 3 nights later, closer this time, faster. They circled the house twice, then stopped at the back door. I heard fingers, too many of them, drag slowly across the wood. I grabbed my phone and checked the time, 2:13 a.m. again. Something tapped once, then twice. Then came a whisper, low and broken, like a voice that had forgotten how to be human. I couldn't understand the words, but I recognized the tone. It was trying to sound like me. The whisper stopped, replaced by silence so heavy it made my ears ring. I forced myself to look out the kitchen window. Standing just beyond the porch light was a shape taller than any man, its outline wrong, blurred like heat rising off asphalt. Snow fell through it, untouched. its head tilted slowly, as if listening. Then it spoke my name. Perfectly. I didn't answer it. I couldn't. My throat locked up, and my body refused to move. Like some instinct deep inside me knew that acknowledging it would be a mistake I couldn't undo. The shape remained there for several minutes, perfectly still, as if waiting for permission. Then, slowly, it leaned closer to the window. That's when I noticed the details my mind had been avoiding. Its limbs bent at unnatural angles, too many joints, each one shifting slightly as if struggling to hold a solid form. Where its face should have been, there was only a pale, uneven surface. Smooth in some places, rippling in others, like ice melting and refreezing at the same time. The whisper returned, softer now. "Ethan, let me in." It wasn't a demand. It sounded tired, lonely. Finally, it stepped backward, fading into the darkness of the trees. The moment it vanished, the forest erupted with sound. Wind, creaking branches, distant animals, as if the world had been holding its breath. I sat on the kitchen floor until sunrise, afraid that if I stood up, it would come back. The next morning, Black Pine felt wrong. Not quiet, hollow. People moved through town quickly, eyes down, doors locked despite the daylight. At the diner, Linda poured my coffee without a word, her hands shaking so badly she spilled it. When I asked her what was happening, she finally looked at me. "You heard it," she said. It wasn't a question. She told me the town's secret in pieces, like she was afraid saying too much at once would summon something. Every winter, someone new arrives in Black Pine, someone running from something. And every winter, something comes out of the forest to meet them. It copies voices, faces, memories. If you answer it, if you invite it inside, it doesn't kill you. Not right away. It replaces you. Walks into town wearing your life like a coat, while you disappear into the woods, screaming with a voice no one will recognize. Linda leaned closer, tears pooling in her eyes. "And the snow," she whispered. "The snow never melts where it takes you." I tried to leave that afternoon. I packed my car in a panic, hands numb from cold and fear, engine idling as snow piled around the tires. As I pulled onto the only road out of Black Pine, the radio crackled to life without warning. Static flooded the speakers, then a familiar voice cut through. Mine. It spoke calmly, reassuringly, telling me to turn around, telling me everything was fine, that I was tired, that I belonged here now. The road ahead stretched longer than it should have, looping back on itself no matter how long I drove. Landmarks repeated, an old mile marker, a fallen sign, a crooked pine. Again and again. My phone lost signal completely. When I finally stopped, heart pounding, I realized the sun hadn't moved. Night fell instantly. From the trees on both sides of the road, I heard footsteps. Dozens of them, all moving in perfect rhythm. Voices followed, overlapping, each one stolen from someone I loved. My mother, my brother, old friends, begging me to come back. I abandoned the car and ran. I don't remember how long I ran. Time didn't behave normally anymore. The forest closed around me, branches clawing at my coat, whispering my name in voices that weren't quite right. Eventually, I collapsed near the tree line behind my house, lungs burning, vision swimming. That's when I saw it again. It stood in my yard, wearing my face now, almost perfect, except its smile lingered too long, stretching wider than mine ever could. It waved at me gently, like a neighbor saying hello. Walter stood beside it, nodding approvingly. "Too late," he called out. "You noticed it. That's how it learns." The thing stepped toward the house, my house, keys in its hand. My memories flickered across its expression. Moments from my childhood, my regrets, my fears. As it crossed the threshold, warmth spilled from the doorway. Behind me, the snow thickened unnaturally, climbing up my legs, freezing me in place. I screamed, but the sound that came out wasn't my voice anymore. I woke up alone the next morning, or at least I thought I did. The snow outside had receded, leaving my yard looking untouched, pristine, as if nothing had happened. My house was locked from the inside, keys in place, but something felt off. I opened the door slowly and stepped out. The footprints in the snow were there, mine, or at least they looked like mine. Perfect. Every step exactly where I had fallen, fled, screamed. But no one could have walked in that snow without leaving a trace. Inside the house, I found the car still parked where I'd left it, engine cold. On the front seat lay a note written in a hand identical to mine. "Welcome home. You belong here now." A faint smell of pine and frost hung in the air, mixed with something I couldn't place. Metallic, almost like blood, but sharper, cleaner. My reflection in the window wasn't mine. It smiled back, wide and wrong. I didn't know if I had survived, or if I was already lost. I never left Black Pine again. The townspeople continued their silent lives, glancing occasionally with knowing eyes, as if checking to see whether I had learned the rules. Every night, the footsteps returned, circling my home, whispering my name, sometimes mimicking voices from my past. I tried to record them once. The playback was empty. Only the faintest crackle of static, like something laughing just out of reach. Occasionally, I catch glimpses of my double moving through town, smiling at neighbors, working at the diner, living a life that should have been mine. I can hear it sometimes when it speaks to someone else in my voice. The snow outside never melts where it walks. I've grown used to it. My name is Ethan Miller, and this is my life now. A ghost in my own home, haunted by the shadow of myself. If you ever find yourself in Black Pine, watch the snow closely. It never lies. My name is Liam Harbour, and this happened during the summer I decided to drive across rural Ontario to document small towns for my travel blog. One evening, I took a detour onto a road locals called Maple Ridge, a narrow, twisting lane lined with dense forest, abandoned houses, and signs that had long since faded. The sun was setting, painting the sky in blood-orange streaks, and I felt that familiar thrill of being somewhere untouched and off the map. At first, it was quiet, too quiet. The trees seemed to close in as I drove, branches scratching the car, wind whispering through broken leaves. The GPS glitched and went completely blank. My phone lost signal. Then I noticed the road signs, repeats of the same old landmarks, as if the road itself was looping on itself, stretching farther than it should. By the time darkness fell, I realized that Maple Ridge was no ordinary road. Something was leading me deeper, and I wasn't sure it wanted me to leave. Night fell fast. Headlights cut through the fog rolling in from the trees, but even that couldn't reveal what was out there. Every so often, I thought I saw movement at the edges of the road, shapes crouching behind trees, vanishing when I blinked. The air grew heavy, as if pressing down on my chest, and a soft scratching sound began following the car. I tried to ignore it, told myself it was an animal, perhaps a deer or fox. But the sound didn't move with the road. It remained just behind me, circling, echoing, always there. My anxiety spiked when the car's mirrors reflected a figure walking parallel to me. Not on the road, not on the shoulder, but floating alongside, limbs swaying unnaturally. Its face was obscured by shadow, yet I could feel its gaze piercing through the glass. I pressed the accelerator, hoping to outrun it. But the road seemed endless, the forest stretching impossibly. Maple Ridge wasn't letting me go. By the third hour, I was exhausted, eyes stinging, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. The GPS remained blank, my phone still dead. And the fog thickened, curling around the car like fingers. The forest seemed alive, shifting subtly, branches forming shapes that resembled faces, watching me from every angle. I tried to reason, to tell myself I had missed a turn or a sign, but the road refused to obey logic. Every landmark repeated, every turn led me deeper into the same shadows. Then I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the road, completely still. Tall and thin, wearing tattered clothing that flapped in the wind, though the air was eerily still. Its face was pale and smooth, eyes hollow but aware. I swerved instinctively. The car spun, tires skidding on wet leaves, but when I looked back through the rearview mirror, the figure was there, following me. Not running, not walking, just gliding with impossible speed. I realized then that Maple Ridge had a will of its own, and it had claimed me. Panic took over. I drove faster, but the road looped endlessly. Every time I thought I recognized a bend, I ended up back at the same old broken mailbox or rotting fence, as if the forest itself had rewritten the landscape. The headlights cut through the fog, but glimpses of movement flashed at the edges. More figures, crouched, hidden, following silently, their presence almost tangible in the air. Then came the whispers, low, indistinct, echoing from all directions. Names I didn't know, voices soft and mournful, calling me to stop, calling me to leave the wheel, calling me into the trees. My pulse thundered in my ears. I saw reflections in the car windows, faces pressed against glass that weren't human, twisted and pale, eyes that glowed faint green. And as I reached for the door handle in a desperate attempt to escape, the road beneath me seemed to dissolve. Like wet paint, bending and folding, showing me that Maple Ridge wasn't just a road, it was a trap. By the fifth hour, fatigue blurred the edges of reality. My hands ached, my eyes burned, and yet I could not stop. The forest seemed to pulse, the shadows stretching unnaturally, brushing the car as if testing my resolve. The whispers intensified, overlapping into a chaotic chorus that made my skull throb. Every turn of the wheel brought the road closer to a mirror image of itself, repeating endlessly, disorienting me, fracturing my mind. Then I saw it again. A figure taller than before, gliding along the roadside. Its limbs bent impossibly, and its face twisted between shapes, as though it couldn't decide how to appear. I slammed the brakes, but the car skidded forward anyway. The figure's eyes glowed with a faint green light, and it tilted its head, observing me with curiosity rather than malice. I realized then that this road was alive. It was aware of me, of my fear, and it fed on it. Maple Ridge had claimed countless travelers before me, and I was next. Desperation overtook me. I pressed the accelerator, tires screaming on wet leaves, fog swirling like smoke around the car. Every turn I took only led me back to the same familiar landmarks, the broken mailbox, the split fence, the rotting barn. The whispers escalated into a roar, voices overlapping, chanting my name, mocking my attempts to escape. The figure multiplied. Reflections in the windows showed dozens of pale, twisted forms mimicking me, some moving independently, others frozen mid-motion. They seemed to feed on my panic, growing bolder, closer. I tried to leave the road entirely, steering toward the forest, but the trees bent unnaturally, reshaping themselves to block my path. The asphalt under the tires rippled like liquid, sucking the car forward. For the first time, I understood that I wasn't being chased. I was being observed. And the longer I stayed, the more the road learned about me. My fears, my reflexes, my weakness. Maple Ridge didn't just want me, it wanted to own me. By the 7th hour, I had lost all sense of direction. The forest twisted around me, the fog thickened to the point where headlights barely cut through it. And the road itself seemed to breathe beneath the tires. The whispers were no longer distant. They were inside my head, echoing every thought, repeating every doubt. I realized with a shiver that the road wasn't just alive. It was sentient. It knew me. It knew my fear. Suddenly, the figure appeared again, directly in front of the car. My heart stopped. It didn't move. The car didn't stop. Time felt fractured. I braced for impact, but the figure shifted seamlessly into the reflection on the windshield, walking with me, inside me. Every instinct screamed to run, but the wheels stayed locked in an endless loop. The forest groaned and twisted, forming shapes I couldn't comprehend. I understood then that Maple Ridge didn't merely trap travelers, it consumed them, folding them into its endless, nightmarish path. Panic reached its peak. I tried to stop, to reverse, to abandon the car. But the road twisted impossibly beneath me. Trees bent into impossible angles, branches clawing at the windows, scraping and scratching like long nails. Figures emerged from the fog. Dozens of pale, thin humanoid shapes gliding alongside, their faces indistinct yet intimately familiar. They whispered secrets, half-formed words, fragments of memories I had never shared. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the forest. The road itself rose and fell like waves, forcing the car forward. Every instinct to escape was met with an unnatural force, pressing me back into the vehicle, as if the road had arms, holding me hostage. I realized with chilling clarity, Maple Ridge wasn't just a road. It was a predator, sentient and infinite, and the figures were its guardians. There was no escape. Every path, every turn, every landmark repeated endlessly, trapping me in a nightmare that lived and breathed. I don't remember how I survived, or if survival was even possible. At some point, the fog lifted slightly, revealing a stretch of road that looked familiar, almost welcoming. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel, and I dared to hope. But the whispers never ceased. They had grown insistent, almost angry. I glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. Hundreds of pale, thin figures lined the road behind me, faces shifting, glowing faint green in the fog, observing every move, matching my speed perfectly. I pressed the accelerator, the tires skidding on wet leaves. But the road didn't obey physics. It twisted, turned, and folded back on itself, forcing me into a perfect loop. Every escape I attempted was denied. Then, as if mocking my fear, the forest opened briefly to reveal a cabin, a familiar silhouette, but with windows like empty eyes. The figures halted at its edge, waiting. I realized then that Maple Ridge didn't just trap travelers. It prepared them, teaching them fear before the final claim. By dawn, I found myself outside the forest, car still intact, heart hammering, drenched in sweat. The road behind me looked normal, empty, untouched, no fog, no figures, no trace of horror. I drove straight to the nearest town, unable to speak for fear of losing my mind. Locals smiled, asked if I had a good night, warned me gently about Maple Ridge. I laughed nervously, but inside I knew the truth. Sometimes, at night, I feel it watching. Shapes in the corner of my vision, whispers just below hearing, and the pull of the road in dreams. I can't forget the green eyes, the endless loops, the way Maple Ridge learns your fears and uses them against you. If you ever travel rural Ontario and find a quiet, twisting road with dense forests on either side, beware. Sometimes the road is not a road at all. It's waiting for you, and it never forgets. My name is Sophie Lang, and this happened during a summer camping trip in Algonquin Provincial Park. My friends and I were looking for adventure, remote lakes, dense forests, and nights under the stars. We came across an old cabin, half hidden among the trees, with peeling paint and a sagging roof. It was unlisted on any map, completely forgotten. Yet the smoke from its broken chimney suggested someone or something was home. We laughed nervously, joking about squatters or forest hermits, and decided to explore. Inside, the air was thick with mildew, and the floorboards groaned under our weight. The furniture was ancient, covered in dust, yet arranged neatly, as though someone had been expecting us. On the table lay a journal, open to a blank page. That night, when the wind rustled through the trees, I swore I heard whispers. Soft, indistinct, carried through the cabin's walls. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but the whispers grew louder, forming words that chilled me. You shouldn't be here. As night fell, the whispers became clearer. I could hear my name, Sophie, carried through the cabin, though no one else was there. My friends laughed nervously, trying to mask their unease, but even they looked tense. The temperature dropped suddenly. Our breath fogged the air inside. I swore the shadows moved independently, stretching and bending unnaturally across the walls. Then I noticed the windows. Outside, the forest seemed wrong. Trees bent in impossible angles, shadows twisting like fingers reaching for the cabin. The journal on the table had new words written in a spidery, uneven hand. They see you. They wait. Panic settled over me like a heavy blanket. I wanted to leave, to run into the woods or back to our campsite. But the door wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder, now almost a chant, circling us, repeating our names, mocking us. I realized, with a chill that sank to my bones, that the cabin didn't want visitors. It wanted witnesses. By the third night, exhaustion had set in, but sleep was impossible. Every creak of the cabin floor, every gust of wind rattling the windows, made my heart jump. The whispers never stopped. They came from everywhere at once, through the walls, the floor, even the air itself. My friends huddled together, trying to ignore it. But I could see the fear etched on their faces, the way their hands shook. I approached the journal again. More words had appeared, scrawled across blank pages. Do not leave. Do not speak. They are here. I tried to destroy it, but the pages reappeared intact the next morning, as though mocking my efforts. That night, I heard footsteps on the roof, slow and deliberate, circling the cabin. I peeked through a window and saw nothing but the twisted forest. Yet the shadows seemed to move independently. Something, or someone, was waiting, watching. And the whispers promised they would not let us leave until we understood why we had arrived. Fear became unbearable. My friends argued about leaving, but the cabin door refused to open fully. It rattled violently, as if resisting us. The whispers became coherent sentences, repeating our names, taunting, describing our deepest fears aloud. I clutched the journal desperately, hoping it contained some answer, some clue. But the words shifted whenever I tried to read them. Through the window, I glimpsed figures. Tall, thin silhouettes gliding silently among the trees, their faces hidden in shadow, eyes glowing faint green in the darkness. They moved closer each time we tried to leave, appearing at multiple windows simultaneously, surrounding the cabin. I realized the forest wasn't simply outside. It was part of the cabin, an extension of whatever force had claimed it. Every tree, every shadow, every sound was a living presence, breathing and watching. We were no longer guests. We were intruders in a place that existed outside the rules of the world, and it had no intention of letting us leave alive. By the fifth night, desperation had taken over. We tried every window, every door, but each one seemed to bend the rules of reality. The forest outside warped, elongating trees, twisting branches toward the cabin like claws. The whispers had grown into a chorus, overlapping our own thoughts, repeating every fear we had spoken, every doubt we had tried to hide. I confronted the journal again. The words were no longer written. They moved, rearranging themselves as if alive. The forest feeds. You are next. Panic clawed at me, but there was no escaping it. Every attempt to flee was met with resistance, the cabin itself shuddering as if breathing. Then I saw the shadows inside, stretching unnaturally along the walls, mimicking our movements before we made them. The forest wasn't waiting outside. It had invaded the cabin. It observed us from every angle, patient, relentless, and utterly hungry for our terror. The sixth night brought a new horror. The whispers began speaking secrets only I knew. Moments from my past, regrets, private fears. My friends looked at me, alarmed, as I murmured their names aloud, almost unconsciously, repeating exactly what the whispers had revealed. The cabin was using us against each other, amplifying distrust and panic. Outside, the figures moved with purpose now, lining the edge of the forest, their green eyes glowing faintly. Every time we tried to leave, the shadows of the trees shifted, forming walls and corridors that funneled us back inside. The cabin was alive, an extension of the forest, and we were trapped inside its heart. I realized we weren't intruders by chance. Something had lured us here, something ancient, patient, and observant. And the whispers, the cabin itself, was preparing us for a final reckoning we could not imagine. By the seventh night, fear had turned into raw, paralyzing terror. Every shadow in the cabin seemed to stretch toward us, reaching, coiling, ready to strike. The whispers now spoke in unison, forming sentences that cut through the air like knives. You cannot leave. The forest has chosen you. My friends trembled silently, too afraid to move or speak. Then the walls themselves seemed to shift. The floorboards groaned unnaturally, bending beneath our weight. A door that hadn't been there the night before opened slowly, revealing a narrow hallway lined with mirrors. In each reflection, we saw ourselves, but twisted, hollow-eyed, staring back with silent screams etched on their faces. I felt my heart pound as one of the figures stepped out of the mirrors into the hallway, gliding toward us with fluid, impossible movement. I realized then that the cabin wasn't just haunted, it was a portal, a living entity that used the forest as its body and mirrors as its doorway. Escape was no longer a choice, it was an illusion. Panic erupted. My friend screamed as the figure advanced, its form bending and stretching unnaturally, dissolving into shadows before solidifying again. The mirrors reflected not just us, but dozens of other people. Faces twisted in terror, some trapped inside the glass, screaming silently. I understood then the whisper's true purpose. They weren't just warnings. They were invitations, luring us into joining the countless others the cabin had claimed over centuries. I ran toward the nearest door, but the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, bending reality. The whispers became a deafening chorus, chanting, laughing, mocking. I could feel my body weakening, mind fraying, as if the cabin were pulling me into itself. My friends tried to grab me, but their hands passed through mine, insubstantial, like I was already halfway between the real world and the forest's nightmare. By the end of the night, we realized the truth. Once the cabin whispers your name, it owns you. There is no escape, only surrender to the forest and its endless hunger. By the 9th night, exhaustion had consumed every ounce of my strength. I no longer understood where the cabin ended and the forest began. The whispers now spoke directly into my thoughts, repeating fears I hadn't even admitted aloud, twisting them into commands. My friends' voices grew faint, almost distant, as if the forest itself was pulling them away. I reached for the journal one last time. The pages now revealed a map, but it wasn't of the surrounding forest. It was of the cabin itself, shifting layouts that didn't make sense. Hallways appeared and disappeared, doors led to nowhere, and mirrors multiplied endlessly. The green-eyed figures stood at every corner, waiting, patient, their silent presence more terrifying than any scream. I realized with horror that the cabin didn't just trap visitors. It consumed them, bending time, space, and perception until they became part of its eternal structure. Whispers added to its chorus for the next unsuspecting travelers. By dawn, I awoke on the forest floor outside the cabin, alone, drenched, and shivering. The cabin was gone, or so it seemed. Its presence vanished as if it had never existed. My friends were nowhere to be found. I ran blindly through the trees, emerging hours later near the park's main trail, shaking, exhausted, haunted by every whisper I had heard. Even now, months later, I cannot forget. In my dreams, the cabin waits. The whispers call my name, and the forest bends unnaturally around me. Sometimes, when I pass a remote stretch of forest, I glimpse a faint green glow through the trees, and I know the cabin still exists somewhere, patient, hungry, ready for the next visitors. If you ever find an abandoned cabin deep in Algonquin Park, listen carefully. Sometimes the whispers aren't just wind through the trees. They are the forest calling your name. And if you answer, it will never let you leave. My name is Ethan Rousseau, and this happened during a solo train trip through northern Quebec. I had always been fascinated by abandoned railways and remote towns. So when I discovered an old passenger train still operating sporadically, I couldn't resist. The car I boarded was nearly empty, the seats worn, windows grimy, and the air thick with the scent of rust and old timber. At first, the ride was uneventful, a gentle sway accompanied by the rhythmic clatter of wheels on tracks. But as we left the last small town behind, the train seemed to take on a life of its own. The lights flickered intermittently, shadows stretched unnaturally across the narrow aisle, and a low hum, barely audible at first, resonated through the floorboards. By the second hour, I noticed the other passengers, or what I thought were passengers. Their faces were obscured, frozen in unnatural expressions, and their bodies sat rigid, too still, as if they weren't truly alive. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that this train was not what it seemed. As the train creaked along the isolated tracks, the shadows grew bolder. Occasionally, I caught movement at the corner of my eye. Figures shifting in impossible ways, heads turning fully toward me without moving their bodies. The rhythmic hum beneath my feet became a chant, soft at first, then rising, echoing through the car as though the train itself were speaking. I tried to leave the car, but the door led only to the next car, which looked identical. Every corridor repeated endlessly, lights flickering, walls stretching unnaturally. Panic set in. The passengers, or whatever they were, remained motionless, yet their presence was oppressive, almost predatory. I could feel eyes following me, even when I couldn't see them. Then I noticed the windows. Outside, the scenery made no sense. Frozen forests, twisted rock formations, and shadowy figures along the tracks moved in ways that defied reality. I understood then that the train was not traveling through geography. It was traveling through something far darker, something that fed on fear and isolation. By the third hour, my panic had turned into cold, creeping dread. The train's hum grew louder, reverberating in my chest as if the metal itself were alive. Every time I glanced at the passengers, I noticed subtle changes. Their heads tilting slightly, fingers twitching in unison, eyes faintly glowing in the dim light. They weren't merely frozen. They were aware, watching me with silent patience, as though waiting for the precise moment to act. I tried speaking, calling out to them, but no sound left my lips. It was as if the train absorbed every voice, every whisper, twisting it into the low hum that vibrated through the floorboards. I felt a cold pressure at the back of my neck, like someone or something was breathing there, unseen. Through the windows, the scenery twisted even further. Shadowy shapes moved alongside the train at impossible speeds, sometimes merging with the trees, sometimes vanishing entirely. The realization hit me. The train was not bound to the tracks. It was traveling through a realm of fear itself, and I was trapped inside. By the fourth hour, exhaustion made it impossible to think clearly. My attempts to find another car or exit were futile. Every corridor looped impossibly, returning me to the same car, the same passengers, the same oppressive hum. The air grew thick, almost tangible, pressing against my chest with every breath. I realized the train wasn't just haunted. It was sentient, feeding on our terror and bending reality to ensure that no one could escape. Then, one of the passengers moved. Slowly, deliberately, a hand lifted, pointing directly at me. The glow in its eyes intensified, sending a surge of panic through my body. I stumbled back, heart hammering, but the train's hum rose into a deafening crescendo. Shadows began to writhe along the walls, stretching into impossible forms, merging with the passengers until I could no longer distinguish one from the other. I understood with a cold clarity. The train existed not in our world, but somewhere in between. A predator that observed, learned, and harvested fear. And it had chosen me. By the fifth hour, sheer terror had taken hold. The hum beneath my feet had transformed into a low, guttural growl, resonating in my bones. The passengers, previously frozen and silent, began moving in synchrony, tilting their heads, shifting their weight, and whispering in voices I couldn't comprehend. The words slithered into my mind, promising unspeakable things if I tried to escape. I fled toward the windows, desperate to see solid ground, but the landscape had become alien. Frozen rivers twisted into impossible angles. Forests appeared upside down, and dark shapes glided alongside the train with unnatural speed. I realized that the train itself was a bridge between dimensions, feeding on the fear of those who boarded it. My pulse raced as I felt an unseen force brush against my shoulder, cold and heavy, like a hand made of shadow. I understood then that the train didn't just observe fear, it amplified it, shaping the environment to trap and torment its passengers until they were broken. The sixth hour was unbearable. I tried to scream, to shake the others, to force my mind away from the whispers, but my voice was swallowed. The figures moved closer, their faces now clearly visible, pale, hollow, almost skeletal, with eyes that glowed faintly green. Each step they took resonated through the car, a hollow echo that synchronized with the train's sinister hum. I stumbled through the corridor, desperate to find a way out. But every doorway led to another identical car. The ceiling stretched and contracted, the floor rippled like water, and the walls seemed to pulse as if alive. I realized that my perception of time was failing. The train wasn't following a timetable. It was bending moments, stretching hours into infinity to prolong the terror. As the whispering chorus rose to a deafening crescendo, I understood the truth. The train didn't simply travel. It hunted, learned, and trapped souls, feeding on fear until its passengers became part of its eternal, nightmarish journey. Escape was no longer an option. By the 7th hour, desperation had turned to sheer terror. The train now seemed alive, groaning and twisting as if it were breathing. The passengers no longer merely moved. They advanced, gliding along the aisle with impossible fluid motion, faces fixed in grotesque expressions of hunger and anticipation. Every shadow in the car bent toward me, reaching, coiling, suffocating. I tried to find another exit, but the corridors folded into themselves, doors leading to identical cars repeating endlessly. Through the windows, I glimpsed impossible landscapes. Rivers flowing upward, forests bending over themselves, dark humanoid shapes racing beside the train at impossible speeds. The whispers had merged into a single voice, deep and resonant. "You belong to the train now." I realized with a chill that there was no escaping the railways of northern Quebec. The train existed beyond our world, feeding on fear, twisting reality, and those who boarded were marked. Once chosen, the passengers were no longer travelers. They were part of its eternal nightmare. Panic overwhelmed me. The train car seemed to stretch into infinity, the ceiling rising and falling like a living creature, the floor pulsing beneath my feet. The whispers became commands, urging me to surrender, to join the others, to become part of the train itself. I stumbled, desperate, but my body felt heavy, disconnected, as if reality itself resisted my movement. The passengers now circled me, their hollow eyes glowing faint green, faces contorted into silent screams. Shadows from the windows merged with the figures, creating forms that defied comprehension. Part human, part darkness, impossible geometry. I understood then that the train's purpose was to consume, to trap, and to convert fear into power. Every instinct screamed to escape. Yet the corridors only folded further, leading me in endless loops. The train's hum resonated in my chest, syncing with my heartbeat, reminding me that I was not merely a passenger, I was prey. And the journey had only just begun. By the 9th hour, exhaustion and terror merged into a paralyzing fog. My vision blurred, corridors twisted endlessly, and the hum became a deafening roar, vibrating through my skull. The passengers now pressed closer, their glowing eyes fixed on me, whispering promises of eternity if I gave in. Each step I took felt heavier, my body resisting, as though the train itself sought to claim me. I realized that the train's journey was not bound by distance. It existed outside time and space, feeding on the fear of its passengers for centuries. The shadows coalesced into humanoid forms, their faces frozen in expressions of endless torment. The whispering voice now came from all directions. "Join us, or be lost forever." I understood with chilling clarity that this was not a mere haunting. The train didn't just trap souls, it converted them into part of its living nightmare, adding them to the chorus of whispers for the next unsuspecting traveler. By dawn, I awoke alone, slumped against a wall in a small, empty train station somewhere in northern Quebec. The train was gone, leaving no trace. only tracks stretching into misty oblivion. My body shook, my clothes soaked with sweat, and my mind raced with the memory of every whisper, every shadow, every impossible moment. I left the station, avoiding the nearby tracks, but the memory of the train never faded. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear the faint clatter of wheels and the hum of its supernatural engine echoing through my dreams. I know now that the train still runs, waiting for the next passenger foolish enough to board. And if you ever see an old passenger train moving through the remote forests of northern Quebec at night, listen closely. It may already have chosen you. My name is Clara Whitman, and this happened during a winter hiking trip in British Columbia's remote mountains. My friends and I were searching for an old lodge, rumored to offer refuge for travelers, untouched for decades. When we finally found it, the lodge appeared almost impossibly pristine. Snow swept clean, smoke curling lazily from the chimney. It seemed welcoming, a rare warmth amid the frozen wilderness. Inside, the lodge was eerily quiet. The air smelled faintly of pine and old wood, and the furniture, though aged, was perfectly arranged. On the mantel, a row of faded photographs depicted families smiling through decades past, though one figure always seemed to blur when I looked directly. At first, we dismissed it as a trick of the light. As night fell, strange noises began. Floorboards creaking in empty rooms, doors softly closing on their own, and faint whispers echoing from the walls. I began to feel watched, and the lodge, once welcoming, took on an oppressive, suffocating presence, as if it were alive and aware of our every move. By the second night, the lodge revealed its darker nature. The whispers became distinct voices, calling our names, mocking us, recounting private fears with chilling precision. Shadows moved independently, stretching along the walls and ceiling, elongating and coiling as if alive. I caught glimpses of figures in the windows, their faces pale and hollow, standing silently in the snow, watching. We tried to leave, but every exit seemed to vanish or lead us back into the same room. The lodge's layout shifted unnaturally, hallways stretching endlessly, doors opening into walls. Even our sense of time faltered. Hours passed in minutes, then reversed inexplicably. I realized that the lodge wasn't merely abandoned. It was a trap, a living entity that existed to manipulate, terrify, and consume those who entered. Panic set in as I understood that the lodge had chosen us for a reason, though I could not yet comprehend why. Every step I took felt heavy, as if the floor itself resisted me, and the whispers grew louder, urging surrender to the lodge's invisible authority. By the third night, the lodge's presence became suffocating. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind rattling the windows, sent shivers down my spine. The whispers had grown louder, forming sentences that revealed secrets no one else should have known. My friends huddled together in fear, yet I could see the terror etched across their faces, the way their hands shook uncontrollably. I wandered into the main hall, desperate for answers. The photographs on the mantel now appeared to move subtly, the figures within shifting positions, always watching. The blurred figure from earlier was clearer, pale, eyes black voids, staring directly at me. I recoiled, heart racing, but the figure didn't vanish. It lingered, a silent sentinel, as if judging whether I belonged in this lodge or would be consumed by it. The air grew colder, heavier, pressing against my chest. The lodge wasn't merely haunted. It was alive, shaping reality around us. And I realized that it would not release us until it was done with its game. By the fourth night, the lodge became openly hostile. Doors slammed shut on their own, windows rattled violently, and shadows twisted across the walls, taking shapes that seemed both humanoid and monstrous. The whispers now mocked our fear, repeating our names in distorted tones, recounting our thoughts before we even voiced them. I tried to rally my friends to leave, but the layout had changed completely. Hallways looped into themselves, staircases descended into rooms that did not exist before, and mirrors reflected not us, but twisted versions of ourselves. Faces frozen in silent screams, eyes hollow, bodies warped. Each reflection seemed to anticipate our movements, mimicking us with terrifying accuracy. A cold dread settled over me as I realized the lodge was feeding on our fear, growing stronger with each heartbeat. The pale figure from the photographs appeared at the end of the hallway, motionless but palpable. And I knew with a sinking certainty that we were now trapped in a living nightmare that would not end until the lodge was satisfied. By the fifth night, fear had become unbearable. The whispers no longer merely spoke, they commanded. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the old timber felt purposeful, as if the lodge itself were guiding us toward some inevitable fate. My friends trembled silently, unable to speak, each of us trapped in our own panic, while the lodge observed, patient and merciless. I ventured into the kitchen, hoping for some clue, some sign of reality. But the room defied logic. Cabinets stretched impossibly high, shadows pooled in corners, and every utensil seemed to vibrate with a low, resonant hum. The pale figure from the photographs appeared again, hovering just beyond the doorway, its black, void eyes fixed on me. I could feel it drawing the fear from my very soul, pressing it into the air like a tangible weight. The lodge was no longer a building. It was a living predator, feeding on our terror, reshaping reality to keep us terrified, weak, and compliant. Escape seemed impossible. By the sixth night, the lodge intensified its torment. Hallways stretched into infinity, staircases looped back on themselves, and the air thickened with cold, almost solid, pressing against us like a living force. The whispers merged into a chorus, repeating our deepest fears, mocking our attempts at reason, feeding the lodge's hunger. I tried to rally my friends, urging them to move, to escape, but they were frozen, not physically, but mentally, trapped in the lodge's influence. The photographs on the mantel shifted again, now showing scenes of despair. Previous visitors, twisted and pale, trapped forever within the walls. I realized that the lodge captured not only bodies, but minds, converting fear into its own essence. A chill ran down my spine as the pale figure emerged fully into the room, gliding silently toward us, its presence heavy, oppressive, undeniable. I knew with certainty that the lodge would not release us willingly. Our only choice was survival, and even that seemed uncertain. By the seventh night, terror had become absolute. Every corner of the lodge seemed to move, walls bending subtly, floors rising and falling like a living creature. The whispers were relentless, now forming sentences that cut through my mind. You belong here. Fear is your guide. Surrender and join us. My friends' eyes reflected the lodge's influence, hollow and distant, as if pieces of their minds had already been absorbed. I tried to retreat to the main hall, but the lodge resisted. The door twisted, elongating the hallway beyond comprehension. Shadows coalesced into shapes, part human, part darkness, stretching and curling around the furniture. The pale figure from the photographs hovered silently in the center, its black void eyes locking onto me with unwavering intent. I understood then that the lodge was a predator of the mind, feeding on fear, twisting perception, and trapping souls for eternity. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet the lodge had already ensnared us. Its walls pulsed, alive with anticipation, and I realized our nightmare was far from over. By the 8th night, reality unraveled completely. Hallways twisted impossibly, furniture morphed into grotesque forms, and mirrors reflected not us, but twisted, screaming versions of ourselves. The whispers became deafening, repeating our fears, mocking our attempts to resist. My friends were barely recognizable. Faces drained of expression, moving robotically, as if already half-claimed by the lodge. I stumbled through the shifting corridors, desperate to find a window or door that led to the outside. Every exit dissolved before me, replaced by more corridors, more shifting walls, more shadows that moved independently of light. The pale figure followed silently, every step resonating with our fear, every gaze stripping away my will. A cold realization settled in my chest. The lodge didn't merely trap souls, it consumed them, bending time, space, and sanity until escape was impossible. I understood with a shiver that our journey would end only when the lodge was done feeding. And by then, we would no longer be ourselves. By the 9th night, exhaustion and terror consumed every part of me. The lodge had become a labyrinth of impossible angles, walls folding inward, ceilings stretching upward, and shadows twisting in ways that defied reason. The whispers had merged into a single, omnipresent voice. You will remain. You will join us. My friends, pale and vacant, had become part of the lodge's machinery, their movements mechanical, their minds trapped in the entity's grip. I understood, with a deep, cold dread, that the lodge wasn't just a building, it was a living predator, feeding on fear and bending reality to its will. The pale figure from the photographs loomed nearer, silent but commanding, a sentinel of the lodge's unyielding hunger. Every instinct screamed to flee, but the lodge had rewritten the rules of reality. There was no escape, only submission. I realized then that the lodge's true power lay not in walls or windows, but in its ability to consume the mind, leaving nothing behind but terror and whispers for the next visitor. By dawn, I awoke outside the lodge, snow crunching underfoot, breath visible in the frigid air. The building was gone, vanished without trace, as if it had never existed. My friends were nowhere in sight, and my body trembled uncontrollably. The memory of every whisper, every shadow, every impossible corridor haunted me, etched into my mind like fire. Even now, months later, I cannot escape the lodge's presence. In dreams, I hear whispers, see shifting shadows, and feel cold hands brush against me. Sometimes, when traveling through remote stretches of British Columbia, I glimpse faintly lit windows in the distance, though no building stands there. I know, with chilling certainty, that the lodge still exists somewhere, patient, feeding, waiting for the next unwary travelers to wander into its grasp. If you ever encounter a lodge deep in the wilderness, pristine yet isolated, listen carefully. Some buildings are more than structures. They are predators, and once chosen, you may never leave. My name is Lucas Harrington, and this happened during a solo camping trip deep in the forests of Manitoba. I had long been drawn to isolated wilderness, seeking solitude and the chance to reconnect with nature. The first day was peaceful, towering pines, rustling leaves, and the distant call of birds. But as night fell, an uneasy stillness replaced the serenity. The forest felt alive in a way that was unnatural, as though the trees themselves were observing me. I set up camp near a small clearing, but the moment I turned my back to gather firewood, I heard faint whispers. At first, I dismissed them as the wind through the trees, but the voices grew clearer, almost articulate, calling my name softly. Shadows shifted in the corners of my vision, always just beyond the light of my lantern. My heart raced as a realization crept over me. I was not alone. Something was in these woods, and it was waiting. By the second night, the whispers had grown bolder. I could hear them circling my camp, sometimes just beyond the tree line, murmuring indistinct words that made my skin crawl. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves made me freeze in place, listening. The forest seemed to twist around me. Paths I had walked during the day, now unfamiliar, leading back in circles to the same clearing. I spotted shapes in the darkness. Tall, thin, humanoid silhouettes that vanished whenever I tried to focus on them. My attempts to leave were futile. The woods seemed to conspire against me, shifting unnaturally to keep me within their grip. The air grew heavy and cold, pressing against my chest with each breath. It was then I realized that the forest itself was alive, feeding on fear, and the whispers were more than sounds. They were a lure, guiding me deeper into the trees. By the third night, the forest's presence became suffocating. Every tree seemed to lean closer, branches stretching unnaturally toward my tent. The whispers now spoke in sentences, repeating my fears in voices that sounded almost human, but carried an otherworldly cadence. I could no longer distinguish between reality and imagination. Shadows moved independently of the moonlight, coiling and twisting like living smoke. I tried to leave, venturing along a familiar path. But the woods had changed. Trails I had walked during the day now led back to the same clearing. Panic set in as I realized the forest was manipulating the terrain, bending space and time to ensnare me. Occasionally, I glimpsed movement between the trees. Tall, thin figures, always watching, always silent, vanishing whenever I tried to confront them. A chill crawled up my spine as I understood that the whispering woods were not merely haunted. They were sentient, feeding on the terror of those who dared enter, and I was their prey. By the fourth night, the forest had become hostile. The whispers no longer simply echoed. They issued commands, urging me to follow deeper into the woods. Every step I took felt resisted by invisible forces. The ground seemed to rise and fall beneath my feet, roots tangling around my boots, slowing me down. I realized the forest didn't just trap bodies, it manipulated minds, bending perception to amplify fear. Figures appeared more clearly now, tall, skeletal silhouettes that moved with a predatory grace, always at the edge of vision. I tried to scream, but the sound died in my throat. Every attempt to escape led me in circles, back to the clearing where my tent awaited, eerily untouched, yet somehow threatening. The forest seemed to pulse with life, breathing around me, and I knew with a sinking certainty that it had no intention of letting me leave unscathed. A wave of despair washed over me. The whispering woods had claimed me as one of its own, slowly eroding my resolve, feeding on my terror night after night. By the fifth night, fear had become overwhelming. The whispers no longer merely circled me. They followed me, resonating from every direction, repeating my name with uncanny precision. My footsteps became uncertain, as if the forest itself resisted my escape. Trees bent and swayed even without wind, casting elongated shadows that seemed to reach for me, their branches clawing at my jacket and skin. The skeletal figures appeared more frequently now, not just at the edge of vision, but stepping from the shadows entirely. Their movements were fluid and unnatural, gliding silently over the forest floor, stopping only when they noticed me. I felt the weight of their gaze, suffocating and inescapable, and understood that the whispering woods did not tolerate intrusion. Panic surged through me as I realized the forest thrived on terror. bending reality to ensnare its prey. My mind raced to find logic, but the woods offered none. Only the relentless pull of fear and the ever-present whispers guiding me deeper into the heart of the nightmare. By the sixth night, the forest had become a living trap. Paths I remembered were gone, replaced by tangled roots and towering trees that shifted subtly, guiding me into its grasp. The whispers intensified, their sentences now clear. Stay. Follow. Fear us. Every nerve in my body screamed to resist, but every step felt heavier, as if unseen hands pushed me forward. The skeletal figures moved closer, circling the clearing, their movements synchronized with the whispers. I stumbled over roots and rocks, my breath ragged, realizing that the forest's purpose was not just to terrify, but to condition me, to break my will. The darkness was alive, pulsating, and responding to my fear, shaping the environment to feed on it. A cold dread settled into my bones as I understood the truth. The whispering woods were eternal predators. They did not merely haunt, they consumed, bending both the mind and the land itself until prey became part of their endless, terrifying cycle. By the seventh night, the forest had become an inescapable nightmare. Every tree seemed alive, twisting toward me, branches stretching like grasping hands. The whispers now spoke in a chorus, repeating my fears in overlapping, distorted tones. Each shadow seemed to grow darker, thicker, pulsating as if the very forest breathed with malicious intent. The skeletal figures were no longer subtle. They moved directly toward me, gliding silently across the forest floor. I could feel their presence pressing against my mind, urging me to succumb to the fear that had already taken root in my heart. Every attempt to flee only led me in circles, the forest reshaping itself around me, feeding on my panic. A deep, primal understanding gripped me. The whispering woods were not merely haunted, they were predators, sentient and patient, drawing terror from all who entered. And now, it had fully marked me as its prey, testing my will as it reshaped reality around me with every step. By the eighth night, the forest had completely consumed my perception. Trails I once knew vanished, replaced by endless dark corridors of trees, roots forming impossible arches over my head. The whispers became commands, urging me deeper, promising revelation and doom in equal measure. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, felt amplified. Each a signal of unseen observers circling, waiting. I stumbled into a clearing where the moonlight barely touched the ground. The skeletal figures appeared in a circle, their black, empty eyes fixed on me. Shadows stretched unnaturally, merging with their forms, creating shapes that seemed to defy geometry, alive with malevolence. The air pressed against me, thick and suffocating, as the whispers repeated, "You are ours. Fear binds you." Terror rooted me in place. I knew the forest wasn't simply trying to scare me. It was conditioning me, bending my will, and preparing me for a fate from which there might be no return. By the ninth night, exhaustion and fear had fused into a paralyzing weight. Every tree leaned closer, the shadows stretched unnaturally, and the whispers had become a relentless torrent, echoing inside my mind, repeating every private fear I had ever held. The skeletal figures circled closer, their black void eyes fixated, silently judging, patient predators waiting for me to break. I stumbled forward, following no real path, the forest reshaping itself at will. The branches twisted like fingers, guiding me deeper into the heart of the nightmare. I realized that the whispering woods did not merely trap wanderers. They rewrote perception, bending time and space so prey could never leave. My own reflection in a pool of stagnant water showed me, twisted and pale, a version of myself already claimed. Every instinct screamed to resist, but the forest's presence was overwhelming. I understood then that survival depended not on escape, but on endurance. Resisting surrender to the wood's intelligent, malevolent hunger. By dawn, I emerged alone from the whispering woods, snow and frost covering the forest floor, the morning light barely piercing the canopy. The clearing where I had spent nights felt distant, unreal, as though it existed only in memory. My body was trembling, every nerve frayed, and the echoes of whispers lingered in my ears. Though I had escaped physically, the forest's influence lingered. Shadows haunted my peripheral vision, whispers threaded through dreams, and the feeling of being watched never left. I knew, with chilling certainty, that the whispering woods were eternal predators, waiting for the next traveler to wander too far, too deep. The memory of those nights and the skeletal figures would remain with me forever. A constant reminder that some forests are alive, patient, and hungry for fear. If you ever find yourself alone in the deep woods of Manitoba, listen carefully. Some whispers are not the wind, and some predators do not hunt with claws, but with your own mind. My name is Clara Benson, and this happened during the summer I volunteered at an old lighthouse in Nova Scotia. I had always loved the sea, the way it could soothe or swallow, and this lighthouse promised isolation and quiet reflection. It stood on a rocky outcrop, waves crashing violently below, paint peeling, light dimming from years of neglect. The locals called it abandoned, but it was still operational. I was its caretaker for the season. The first few days were peaceful. I kept the grounds clean, maintained the lens, and logged the schedules. The ocean roared like a living thing, constant and hypnotic. At night, the wind whipped through the cracks, echoing like voices that weren't there. I thought I was alone. Then, during the third night, I heard footsteps on the spiral stairs leading to the lantern room. Slow, deliberate. I froze. I was alone. I had locked the doors. Whoever or whatever was there had climbed quietly, without a sound beyond my imagination. I waited, heart pounding, breath held. The steps paused midway. I could hear a soft scraping, like nails dragging lightly across metal. I told myself it was the wind. The building groaned. The stairs creaked with the pressure of the sea. But that rhythm, it didn't belong to the building. It belonged to something alive. I grabbed my flashlight and ascended, each step careful, trembling, my hand trailing along the railing. Halfway up, the light caught something, a reflection in the window of the lantern room. A figure, taller than any human should be, pale as sea foam, its eyes glowing faint green in the darkness. It didn't move, didn't breathe. It just watched me. Frozen, I blinked. When I opened my eyes again, it had vanished. The staircase was empty, the lantern room dark. My flashlight flickered as the wind slammed against the lighthouse, whispering like it had secrets it wanted me to hear. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind. The isolation, the constant roar of the ocean, the way the wind cut through the cracks. It had to be playing tricks on me. I forced myself to continue the nightly rounds, checking the lens, polishing the glass, logging every detail. Yet each night, the feeling grew stronger, heavier, like someone or something was waiting for me to slip. On the fifth night, I awoke to a low thrum, not from the sea, not from the lighthouse. A heartbeat, slow, deliberate, echoing through the wooden beams. I followed it instinctively to the spiral stairs. At the bottom, the floorboards were damp. Footprints led up, wet and glistening as if the water from the sea had been carried inside. But there was no one there, and the stairs were pristine otherwise. Something had been inside while I slept, watching, learning. And the thrum, that heartbeat, pulsed through the walls as if mocking my fear. I spent the 6th day on edge. I avoided looking at reflections, mirrors, windows, anything that might betray movement behind me. The locals I spoke to were strange, evasive. They warned me with clipped words not to wander near the cliffs at night, not to listen to the whispers of the sea. I laughed, hiding my fear, but every word felt like a prophecy. That night, the whispers began, not through the walls, not through the wind, but inside my head, faint and slippery. They spoke my name, Clara, over and over. At first, they mimicked my voice, gentle, almost coaxing. Then they changed, rougher, older, something ancient bleeding through their tone. I bolted up the spiral stairs to the lantern room, flashlight in hand, only to find the glass shattered, pieces scattered across the floor, and the figure standing at the railing, gazing out at the waves as if I weren't there. It turned its head slowly. Eyes met mine. And that heartbeat began again, louder this time, matching my own pulse. By the 7th night, I was unraveling. Sleep had abandoned me completely, replaced by nightmares that blended seamlessly with reality. Every time I closed my eyes, the figure appeared, pale and silent, drifting across the lantern room, always just out of reach. I started to notice small changes in the lighthouse during the day. Scratches on the stairs I hadn't made, condensation patterns on the windows forming shapes, faint whispers in empty hallways. One night, the figure came closer than ever. It didn't move, at least not in a normal way. Instead, it blurred and stretched, slipping along walls, folding its long limbs around corners, bending physics as if the building itself obeyed it. Its glowing green eyes fixed on mine. I raised the flashlight, trying to assert control, but the light passed right through it. Then I heard it speak, not in my voice this time, but in 1,000 voices layered together. You cannot leave. The sea brought you here, and the sea will not let you go. By now, I stopped pretending the lighthouse was safe. I barricaded doors, stacked furniture, anything to keep it out. But safety was an illusion. At midnight, I heard the soft drip of water, then the creak of the spiral stairs under weight that wasn't mine. The whispers grew urgent, overlapping, a chorus that made my skull throb. I confronted it once, stepping onto the lantern balcony, shouting into the darkness. My own voice returned, distorted, echoing from the cliffs below. The figure was there, floating just outside the railing, eyes fixed on me, arms extended in a gesture that was both invitation and command. I stumbled back inside, heart hammering, gasping for rational thought. Then the storm hit. Wind battered the walls, rain and seawater slamming through cracks. I realized, too late, that the figure thrived in the chaos. It moved faster, slipping past barricades, sliding silently across the floor. And when I turned the flashlight toward it again, it was gone. But not gone. Its reflection lingered in every window, in every polished surface, watching, waiting. By the 8th night, I was no longer human in my own eyes. I moved through the lighthouse like a ghost, too afraid to speak, too aware of every creak and whisper. I stopped trying to barricade doors. Instead, I tried to hide, curling into corners, praying it wouldn't notice me. But hiding was useless. The figure knew. It always knew. I finally understood what it wanted. Observation. It didn't attack, not in a conventional sense. It studied me. It imitated me. When I left my journal on the table, pages opened themselves. Words I didn't write appeared. You belong to the sea now. When I touched them, ink seeped cold and wet into my fingers. Then it began to mimic me perfectly. My gestures, my voice, even my thoughts. I caught glimpses of myself in reflections, and it moved when I didn't. My body felt borrowed, my memories slipping, as if the lighthouse and the figure were erasing me slowly. Piece by piece, desperation took over. I ran up the spiral stairs to the lantern room, intending to escape into the storm outside. But the figure anticipated me. The door slammed shut before I could reach it. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving me in darkness, heart pounding, ears straining for the faintest sound. Then the whispering became words, layered and urgent. You cannot leave. You are part of the sea now. The railing beneath my hands warped in ways impossible for metal. The floor seemed to ripple like water. And when I looked up, the figure had split into dozens of smaller shapes, each wearing my face, each moving independently, each whispering my memories back at me. I stumbled back, falling against the lens, shattering glass under my weight. Moonlight from the storm illuminated them, all of them staring with those impossible green eyes. I realized then that the lighthouse itself was a trap. And the figure, the sea, it had been waiting for someone like me for years. I don't remember how I escaped the lantern room. One moment, I was surrounded by a sea of twisted reflections of myself. The next, I was on the balcony, rain lashing against my face, the wind tearing at my clothes. I ran, not knowing where, not caring if I survived. The storm roared, waves smashing violently against the rocks below. And somewhere deep inside, I could feel the figure sliding along the walls, whispering my name. When dawn finally broke, I was back inside the lighthouse, drenched and shivering. The storm had passed, but the silence that replaced it was worse. Everything was exactly as it had been before. The spiral stairs, the shattered lantern, the journal. But I knew the figure hadn't left. It lingered, invisible, always watching, waiting. I tried to speak to the locals, to warn them, but no one acknowledged my fear. They treated me as if nothing had happened. I realized then that I was alone, completely alone, with the lighthouse and the sea as my only companions and my only jailers. I stayed at the lighthouse the rest of the summer, trapped in a routine of cleaning, logging, and surviving the whispers that never ceased. Every night, the figure returned, sometimes visible, sometimes hidden, always watching, always imitating me in subtle ways. I caught glimpses of it moving in the reflection of the ocean, sometimes performing tasks I had done earlier, faster and more precise. By the end of the season, I was unrecognizable, a hollow shell of the person who had arrived. My thoughts were no longer entirely my own, and my reflection often stared back at me with alien intent. I left when the contract ended, but the lighthouse was never truly behind me. Its pull stayed with me, the ocean, the figure, the whispers. I know one day I will return, or it will come for me. If you ever find yourself near an abandoned lighthouse along the Nova Scotia coast, watch the windows. Sometimes, the sea doesn't just watch. It waits, and it never forgets. As the sun rises over the remote corners of Canada, the horrors we've explored tonight remain etched in memory. From the vanished lodge of British Columbia to the whispering woods of Manitoba, from the shadows lurking in small-town streets to the secrets hidden in abandoned homes, each story reminds us that terror often hides in the most unsuspecting places. These are not legends or campfire tales. They are real encounters, experienced by ordinary people who found themselves facing the unimaginable. The fear we feel watching these stories is only a glimpse of what it's like to be there, alone, in the darkness, with the unknown pressing in from every side. Remember, the world is filled with places that should be safe, yet are anything but. Every shadow may hide more than it seems, every whisper may carry a warning, and every seemingly ordinary place may conceal a nightmare waiting to unfold. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Canada's most disturbing small-town horror stories. Stay alert, stay safe, and never underestimate the darkness. Thanks for watching. This was Dark Fears.